Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knows each other. Alton, I'm not sure if you all have. I think most people have
Probably
met
not.
each other except for no. You know Faye. You know Wang Fei.
Yeah.
Alton is on our board and is a graduate of our school and is at AECOM. I'll do a formal. I'm gonna just maybe read just a. Well, first I should say I sent everybody just some kind of prompt questions. Did you get those? Did you guys get those today?
Yes.
So I think that's the general sort of the gist of it. I believe we can talk for about an hour and a half. I don't know how long we will want to talk, but I think the idea. Well, I'll just read this little introductory, then I'll introduce you all, and then maybe I'll ask the first set of questions. And I think we can just kind of play it by ear and go from there. So the title of this panel is Challenges and Opportunities for Students in the Age of COVID-19. The larger conference is considering, I think, the impact of COVID-19 on architecture, on architecture education. I think like a lot of people, we all know that COVID-19 is something in and of itself, but it also, I think, has accelerated and exacerbated a lot of trends and conditions that were already underway. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about those. But so this panel focuses on several generations of Chinese architecture students studying in the U.S., paying special attention to the challenges and opportunities afforded those shaped by both U.S. U.S. and China. More broadly, we want to ask, what is the future of architecture education and practice in the U.S. and China in the new COVID world we all inhabit? In general, I think that's what everybody at this conference is probably asking. My name is Michael Speaks. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture at Syracuse University, and I'm joined by a couple of Syracuse colleagues. The only one not involved in architecture is my colleague Ying-Yi, who's an associate professor at the Maxwell School here at Syracuse University. She's author of Ambitious and Anxious: How Chinese College Students Succeed and Struggle in American Higher Education. I recommend it to all of you. I've read it many times. It's really quite an exciting and important book. Professor Fei Wang, who's a director of our China programs at Syracuse Architecture, and he's also the founder of Urside Hotel and Design. Alton Chow, who's a vice president at AECOM, I think the largest architecture firm in the world. And the Asia Pacific division. He's in Hong Kong. He's also a graduate of our School of Architecture at Syracuse, and he's on our board of directors at Syracuse. Na Wei, principal Wei Architects in Beijing. One of the most important architects in China and an influencer and cultural figure beyond architecture. And so we're very happy to have her here. And Aric Chen, Director of Design Miami, professor at Tongji University College of Design and Innovation, and world traveler, among other things. So very happy to have all of you here tonight. I'm just gonna maybe start out with a general question and have anybody who wants to start take this on. And these questions are kind of all very similar, but you've all experienced with both US and Chinese educational systems. Some of you were educated in both systems. Some of you have taught in both systems. All of you are extremely successful professionals, but you're all global citizens. And as such, you're a product of both the US and China educational systems and work experiences. With all that's happening in the world now, and with globalization itself seemingly unraveling, do you think global citizenship is any longer a meaningful term? How did your experience studying and working in the US and in China prepare you for what you're doing today? And how do you think your experience is different from that of students today? Maybe I'll start and ask Aric. I think Aric, you're a Berkeley architecture grad, and I think you also studied at Cooper Hewitt, or yeah, in New York. Aric is a curator, a professor at Tongji now. Maybe you could say something about, well, whether or not you think this idea of global citizenship is even relevant, or if it even exists, and if it did, what's happened to it, and how did your education shape how you got to where you are today, both your education in architecture and also your work experience in Hong Kong and China and now at Tongji?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for having me. Just a tiny little correction. I'm the curatorial director for Design Miami.
Excuse me.
The director, but it doesn't matter. Just don't want to upset the actual director. So,
okay, sorry. Apologies.
But yes, I mean, this whole idea of global citizenship, I mean, whatever we call it, and I'm sure there will be new terms that develop to describe whatever it is that, or however it is that we can describe people who, have a curiosity, interest, and roots in different parts of the world. That's not going to go away. I mean, we often think of the sort of era of globalization as more or less starting in the 90s, right? And part of that was deregulation of airline industries and trade organizations and so on and so forth. But we think of that as if people were not traveling around and engaging with each other and working transnationally before that. And of course, that's not true. And certainly in the realms of art and design and so on, art and design are by definition, I think cosmopolitanism is a word that you're using also. They are by definition cosmopolitan. I mean, artists and designers, it's wired into them to break boundaries, not to be confined by them. So I would be a little hesitant to think of the current border restrictions and so on as being a permanent state, and also to suggest. I would also be hesitant to suggest, that somehow these different sort of geopolitical games that are going on right now are going to stop creatives from around the world from interacting with each other. In fact, quite the opposite. I think what's going on right now is actually spurring people to be even more connected to those around the world. I mean, it's funny, as a curator, believe it or not, just before the pandemic, I'd started planning a show on deglobalization and our post-global condition for a museum in Lisbon, the Museum of Architecture, Art, and Technology. And so as you say, Michael, the current phenomenon that we're seeing was already well underway before the pandemic. It's sort of just been accelerated and distorted somewhat by it. But these are things that have been going on, and I think it's something that increasingly will not be something that will make artists and designers shy away from these issues, but rather to confront them even more head on.
Wow, this is why I love to talk to Aric, because he always is so optimistic and makes me feel like like things are actually going to work out. Na, what do you think about that? Because you were educated in Beijing. What's funny is I was asking Wang Fei this today. We had a meeting with Na maybe a year and a half ago, and we were talking with some colleagues of hers, and we met the principal from number 4 high school in Beijing. And we were talking about the fact that Na went to Tongji University and studied architecture and went to Yale, and they were like, who cares about that? She went to #4 high school in Beijing. That's actually more important. But you're clear, you're clearly educated at, let's say some of the most important schools of architecture in the world. You were as conversant with practice in the US as you are now in China. What do you think about this idea of global citizenship, and do you think it is under threat, or do you think like Aric that we will evolve into another name and continue to do some of the same things by a different name?
Well, I think first of all, this pandemic make everybody realize even more that we are all global. Is that my voice? And also, I think the same times everybody noticed that we have such a diverse culture. When we facing the similar issues, people from all different cultural background, they will have different consideration and the reactions. So I think that there's very clear to see different people from different area have a different kind of cultural background. That's beyond nationality, I think. So I think after this pandemic, or even from now already, I think there's going to be thinking towards two directions. One direction is to more broader view, like we will need to rethink what is globalization. It's not really just about economic, it's not about trading only, it is about global cooperation. I think from this pandemic, we already see we need to have joint efforts from everywhere to survive as human beings. This is something that we need to consider all together. And at the same time, we will see global cooperation need to all of us to understand each other, to understand that there is a different culture with different people. And we need to think people from their own context, understand why and what they're going to react and how they think. And there's one thing that recently I'm kind of noticed people already to put it into very important position about the bias. And I think that the only way, or I think the best way to avoid bias is to recognize the difference. That's very important. So this is a broader will. Everybody needed to look at more globally. It's more kind of cooperation. But the other direction, I think, is getting more and more clear is we're going to look at a community, or we're going to focus more on neighborhood. I think this pandemic, especially right now, happened in Beijing, this like second wave. The lockdown or kind of constraint, kind of restriction has happened on the unit of a neighborhood instead of a big city anymore. Then we can notice that when we have these issues around the globe, the more important part, real neighborhood that each individual live in. So I think in the future, we're going to have a broader view. We need to have cooperation. We need to have support, data, all this in the global scale. But at the same time, we're going to make all this effort to strengthen the neighborhood, make this neighborhood more sustainable. We can actually have our life based on neighborhood kind of unit, This is beyond like the globalization beyond nationality. I think the neighborhood is going to beyond this debate about the city life or country life. Is more about the local. And I think that's two direction after the pandemic, or already see from current situation.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we see the same thing. I think we see that same phenomena happening all over the world right now. I think a kind of a return to a kind of localism and a return to community and neighborhood. Maybe that is a global phenomena. Faye, what do you, Faye, you're a Tongji graduate and you then studied architecture in the US and at Virginia Tech and then in Montreal, and now you're teaching with us at Syracuse. What do you make about, I mean, what do you think about this idea of global citizenship and cosmopolitanism and the extent to which that's something I think that is shared among all of you, but it's not entirely clear to me that that's going to be true for our students that are graduating now. Will that situation be the same for them? I wonder that. I wonder that. What do you have? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry I might get disconnected any second. So if I get reconnected, so I can repeat things I'm saying, because this is really kind of a bizarre situation. So I'm in quarantine. Also, it's quite global, but also it's very local. And so that's the thing we face every single day. For me, I'm a global citizen because no matter where I go, I live at different time zones. So I stay in China, so I have to deal with a lot of Syracuse kind of a time zone to discuss with you all the time. While I'm in Syracuse, I have to work with a lot of projects and collaborations in Shanghai every single day, or in Shenzhen. So I'm used to this kind of a condition. That's why when this happens, we can readapt it that very quickly. And for Syracuse, I think it's very interesting. It's very unique, and probably Alton knows that better. And Syracuse has a reputation. We are training, we are educating the future generation as a global citizen because we have Florence, London, and New York programs. Then a couple of years ago, we added 3 Cities Asia programs. So right now we are covering every single time zone in the world, and we educate the kids to face all kinds of unknown futures globally. So we don't just train the kids to understand American ways of thinking. So right now, but location is also very important. So which means the global and local, they happen at the same time. And right now, it's getting more and more kind of the relationship between the two is kind of really always back and forth. It's like right now, after the outbreak, all the students, they went to different locations, but then we have to collaborate through sort of a platform. And it surprised me, it went very, very well. And in the beginning, we're so kind of worried about this, how students, they can adapt this kind of a condition because they are younger generation. They know the technology well enough. No matter even the teammates, they are not in the same room. They are not in the same location. They produce amazing work. You can see the background. That's last semester's kind of comprehensive studio students they have made. It's just like it's just blown us, every single professors away. And so we are, I think we are confident for our education. We really help them to open their eyes and to be flexible, not just to train kind of one single ways of kind of a physical entity of architectural education and practice. So they have the ability to deal with all kinds of conditions. And also a lot of our architecture kind of students after graduation, they don't just do architectural design as architectural practice. And many our graduates, they work in WeWork and in many other kind of different fields. They're redefining kind of a architectural practice in a really amazing way. And so right now, I think after the pandemic, it's really people, they understand how important we need to get connected, because a lot of my students, my friends, they were stuck sort of with their parents, family for a while. That didn't happen before. So that's really kind of precious way to rethink about, we need more connections. We need more connections, no matter physical and virtual, and not just kind of a disconnection. So right now, I think the collaboration needs to be in a more kind of different kind of levels. I'm really confident this really is happening to give us kind of different ways to rethink about our future. That's really, really good chance for us.
I want to go to Ying-Yi, and because actually this idea of cosmopolitanism and global citizenship is something I completely stole from her fantastic book, because this was an attribute that in the 90s a lot of Chinese parents were motivated them to send their kids to the U.S. And I wonder, Ying-Yi, do you that obviously, I wonder, do you see if that is changing now? And I wonder, I mean, it's obviously going to change when you look at it from the U.S. side, and you look at the kind of tensions that we see between the U.S. and China. You see COVID and the flight restrictions. You look at the acceleration of the critiques of globalization and neoliberalism, many of which are quite apt. You look at all that, and the idea of sending kids to the U.S. to become global citizens seems not to have the same kind of appeal that it did at one time. Would you agree with that? And if so, where do we stand now with students?
Great, thank you, Michael. First of all, very much. I really appreciate your recommendation of my book. You have raised a very significant question. I think in the short term, you're right. The assessment is pretty much a scale back of Chinese students, probably reducing their interest to study in the United States. Especially their parents are definitely concerned about the safety issues brought about by COVID-19, as well as the rising geopolitical tensions, for sure. But I share with Aric's earlier optimism. I think this is a short-term trouble. Globalization, people are talking about deglobalization, but now I want to share with you another term, not coined by myself, but by, I think, some economists. Globalization is very hard to really reverse now, because all the social structures, the global institutions are there. They're not going to disappear. So what we're experiencing right now, or going to experience for a while, is a slowdown of globalization. So I think the economists coined this as a globalization. It's a new term. And I think I actually agree with that assessment. So in that particular context of globalization, it's an integral part of international student mobility as well. You're going to see a slowing down of student mobility crossing borders. So international education experts nowadays are calling for a new model, so-called internationalization at home. And something that I think, Michael, you're working on right now. So we're going to have Chinese students in the fall, for example, definitely starting their international or American education from China in their home, probably. So that's actually the situation right now. But I really question this whole concept of deglobalization. And relatedly, to address your question more targeted, this desire for cosmopolitanism or cosmopolitan capital, I think is still there. It is fundamentally the desire of the rising middle class families and for their children. And that social structure is there. It hasn't really changed. And the desire for international education and cosmopolitan capital, it is still there.
Alton, I wonder how, we got reconnected when you were in Shanghai, and you were really in the process of reimagining the Shanghai office for AECOM and really refocusing it. And we got connected a lot because you were discussing with us hiring some of our recent graduates, and you did, of course, a remarkable job of completely transforming that office and turning it into a more design-focused one. I wonder, when you look now out at graduates from our school, from other schools, do you see a different profile than when you came out of school? What are you looking for now? What do the prospects look like? Because AECOM is a global company. You have obviously offices all over the world. You're now in Hong Kong, but what is the job market? What is that whole education system that's producing graduates that come and work for you now? Are we doing the right thing? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, first of all, Michael, thank you very much for inviting me. Just to clarify, I was educated 100% in the United States, born and raised. But I would say that I continued my education because I actually did the bulk of my career in China. So if you count my early days of working, starting my career in China and learning how kind of China does work, adapting that to kind of I've learned as a student in the U.S., I would say that, I guess I'm kind of an oddball in terms of that globalization, because I kind of went the other way, although I'm Chinese in ethnicity. I would say that, first of all, in terms of globalization, in terms of the globalization or all these kind of talks, I feel a lot of that is kind of a very snapshot of what's kind of happening right now. I mean, come December, hopefully, or come November, hopefully after the election, policies may very quickly change in the United States, and attitudes may quickly change in the United States. I think there's a lot of conflict that's happening right now. I think there's a lot of polarization between kind of right wing and left wing, but you kind of see that all over the world. And in Hong Kong especially, you're looking at pro-China, pro-democracy, movements that are happening as well. And I think the reality of it all is, I think economic mobility is something that is a driving force. And I think that when there is a lack of economic mobility, whether it's in a democratic government or a fascist or communist or whatever, the cracks in the paint start to kind of reveal itself a lot more, and people start to kind of point fingers, which is kind of what's happening right now. And I think that the reality is the desire for economic mobility. So when we start to look at that frame of mind, and you start to look at a parent or a child beginning their career, what are they going to look at? They're going to be looking at what's going to put them in the best position so that they will be able to have their economic mobility. Whether you're a middle class or a poor, low class, underclass, I don't even know what the proper political term is. But whatever class of person that you are, as long as you have that ability for that economic mobility, and I say economic not in the sense of money. I say that in the sense of just escalation of where you maybe started to where you want to get to, right? It could be academically, it could be artistically, it could be financially. And I think with that being said, I think it's very clear in the market that when you're looking at hiring somebody, people with unique backgrounds, people with backgrounds that are more worldly, that think and can understand things more broadly, tend to excel better. You know, I think back in the day when I was starting my career in Shanghai, you know, I brought something new to the market, right? I was a very Western thinking person, but I spoke Chinese. That was a huge advantage for me back then. I would even say if you were to look at my career, I mean, I failed so many times, but opportunities happened for me so many times simply because of the fact that I was an ABC, right? But I think that that has changed as it's evolved. And if we're just looking at Shanghai or China, I think that evolution has happened because China as a country, as a society, has also become more global and more international and more sophisticated. And I think that, you know, for me right now, you know, we always talk about kind of the preference for typologies when we're hiring in China. You know, the type of people I like to hire are people who are going to be coming to make a career in the city that they want to be in, right? Not to just take a holiday and spend 5 years in a country and then go back home. So with that type of thinking, the typology of people we tend to like to hire are national Chinese people who have studied in the best universities in China, but have gone abroad somewhere to experience a broader life and to understand that things are done differently, so that when they come back and they start working in companies like ours, that they're going to be able to contribute. And not only are they going to be able to contribute, they're going to actually be able to form a culture. You know, Michael, when you and I were talking about me kind of rebuilding our Shanghai practice at that time, you know, we had a variety of different cultures of people, not just ethnically, but I would also say academically. You know, we had engineers, we had project managers, we had economists, we had architects, we had master planners, landscape designers. We had a lot of different typologies of people. And if you take all those different disciplines and then you take all those different ethnicities and you add that into a country like Shanghai, where it's like, it's not a strong, I mean, Shanghai, especially with my office, when we were trying to rebuild it all, you know, we were really starting with zeros. So the idea was really about finding the right seeds, you know, the right people to plant to help develop that culture. And unity is a big thing, right? Being able to get along, be able to understand, being able to see other people's viewpoints. That was a huge thing. So finding people who studied abroad and were coming back, or people who grew up abroad, but then really started to engulf themselves in the local culture that we're in, not just, you know, the expat coming in to party for a couple of years and leave, but to really kind of get into China, learning to speak the language, that kind of stuff. That really added a layer of sophistication that really helped kind of propel things easier, because when you're starting to rebuild a practice, you have to give new ideas, and people who are very rigid and see things only one way are going to fight you no matter what. But if people are open-minded and have come from different backgrounds and can see other things, it really helps, you know, evolve the group, you know, much more quickly than to kind of constantly fight people over and over. And I would say that, you know, just to kind of sum things up, you know, one of the things that I really relied on when rebuilding the practice was not my middle management people. In fact, you know, this may get me in trouble, but I counted a lot of them out because they were so set in their ways. They worked in the career for so long that I was really relying on really young people to come in to kind of really challenge them, to really push them. And I think in this particular generation, with millennials and the kind of questioning and the openness of ideas, that to have that questioning really helped kind of push things forward and made them kind of force the leaders' hands to kind of really start to change. So I think, that's kind of my take on all of it.
Yeah, and that obviously you changed the culture of the office and also introduced a design culture in an organization that was really not known for that. Let me try something else out on you all. I failed to convince you that the world is going to get much worse now with decoupling and the end of globalization. Let me try this out. I think we do live in a very different, let's say, organizational framework of globalization. And I think that has changed. And what I mean by that is, there was a time not too long ago that everyone thought globalization was the West modernizing the world, and the West kind of, let's say, covering the planet in a singular kind of, almost like peanut butter. All over the world is the same. And so that's what I think in the original iteration of globalization, people understood by that. I think what now we see is a form of globalization, which is really just an expression of modernization that is unique and different in different parts of the world. So so if you go to Shenzhen, for example, and you go to an urban village, you experience a speed of modernization that is extremely fast, but seems both accelerated and slow at the same time. You won't find that anywhere in the US, anything like that. And you can go also to Shenzhen and find, parts of the city that remind you of Atlanta. Very sleek and slow. And so what I wonder, and maybe I'll try this out on you, is what we have now is a very different expression of globalization, which is a different kind of understanding of modernization, where it's not linear, but it actually operates at different speeds in different places in different ways. And if that's the case, then what we see are new kinds of globalization, new kinds of cosmopolitanism emerging in different places that are competing, but that are not following and pushed by the singular linear Western idea of modernization. Aric is shaking your head like you're going to go for this one.
Well, yeah, because this was actually exactly what I wanted to say this now. So thank you, Michael. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, because like I think we've been using the terms like cosmopolitanism and globalization probably a bit too loosely. And I sort of mentioned this show that I had started working on before all this happened, looking at and Michael, this might resonate with you, but looking at what I see as being a post-global condition in which you're right, like there was a sort of consensus on what globalization meant, or there seemed to be a consensus on what globalization meant in the 90s and 2000s, and that was, this very sort of neoliberal, coming from, the sort of Reagan Thatcher era idea of tearing down barriers and free trade and so on and so forth, right? With all the sort of homogenizing kind of effects that it's been critiqued for. That's obviously changed, but that doesn't mean that globalization is going away. It's just sort of fracturing and fragmenting and taking different speeds, as you say. Ying-Yi, I agree that there is a slowbalization phenomenon going on, but that's happening concurrently with the acceleration of other types of globalization at the same time. And so what we're seeing is globalization not being the sort of totalizing peanut butter, as Michael described it, but rather a sort of realignment and reordering of different kinds of globalization, as Michael said, happening in different ways in different places. Now, when it comes to like education, for example, which is the topic today, clearly something is going to change with the system that's developed, in which schools, especially in the U.S., U.K., and Australia, have invested so heavily and frankly become so financially reliant on students from China. And maybe this is a question for you, Michael, or Faye. Now, of course, we're not going to see suddenly no Chinese students going to the UK or US or whatever. But as the sort of broader picture gets more complicated, and it really is a convoluted situation we're seeing now. We're seeing sort of liberal democracies closing in, while authoritarian regimes are trying to position themselves as bastions of openness. I mean, it's definitely globalization, but globalization happening in a very, again, sort of convoluted, topsy-turvy sort of way. But going back to education, when you see now students and Chinese students being used as a, let's call it a diplomatic talking point in Chinese relations with Australia, for example, it does make you wonder how that will change. I mean, there will still be students going abroad, and still that strong urge and need, as Ying-Yi said, but how that actually plays out may be different than it has been.
What do you? Oh yeah, Alton, go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to kind of add to that. I think there's one thing that you have to understand, that people are very, very ambitious, right? I mean, if going to Australia means they're not going to want them there, then they'll go to Canada, right? If Canada's not, then they'll go to the U.S. And then you start to see a huge flux of kind of this movement, because they go to where they can go, right? I mean, back in the days when my parents immigrated to the U.S., it was the U.S. that was the easiest place to get into, the most opportunity. Then it became Canada, then it became Australia, right? I mean, I don't think you can stop globalization. I think what's happening now is that, people are beginning to take advantage of new technology to kind of work around it. But I think once this is all over, it's just going to boom again. People are waiting to kind of get out, right?
Well, as some doors close, others will open, and things will just sort of reroute themselves.
Yeah, Aric's point. Yeah. So I want to get back to Aric's point about students being diplomatic talking points. This has not only happened to Sino-Australian relations, it's also very much happening right now between U.S.-China relations. It's very unfortunate. I think it's very unfortunate from the perspective of Chinese students and their families. I think we have to look at this phenomenon from different levels. The diplomatic talking points is really about the international relations and the governmental political play games, basically. And that is very distinct from the level of individual students and their families. And remember, when we're talking about US, Australia, Canada's reliance on Chinese money, most likely the money is about individual students and their parents, their family private funds, not really about the government money. So to some extent, I think Chinese students are really politicized in this process, and in a very reluctant, inadvertent, and unfortunate way. So I think we have to distinguish among these different levels. And I kind of agree with the previous point in terms of this could be changed very quickly after the election. The U.S.-China relations, for example, a big part of it may not be changed. Even Biden is going to become our president. But I think this policy on using Chinese students as diplomatic and political tool is going to change under Biden. At least that's my political sensibility and judgment about it. So in other words, this policy on Chinese students and the visa and all these kinds of politicizing of this population could be changed very soon. But it's, again, I think it's not really driving Chinese students to come here. It's a very individual students and their family decision, and that decision is largely driven by their desire for a better education opportunity. Again, I think going back to Na's alma mater, Beijing No. 4, it really reminds me of my, I've done actually research. Part of my field work in China is done in various public schools with international divisions, and Beijing No. 4 is one of them. So if you go to Beijing No. 4, at least when I was doing my field work back in 2013, it was a huge fever for students in Beijing No. 4. It's a big fight getting to the international division. They can recruit students from both academic and economic elites. So this is really charging like private school tuition money, but their academic admission scores are higher even than the regular division. I don't know whether that has been changed recently, but that really speaks to this strong desire for international education way back 7-8 years ago. And I don't think that would ever change anytime soon, unless, you know, this whole border or student visa going to be rejected or going to be stopped. So that desire is very distinct and independent from the political game that the different governments are playing. Just want to make that point out. Yeah.
So Ying-Yi, you make a very good point in your book about the extent to which many students are influenced by by where their parents may have studied in the U.S. or where they have had positions. I think I recall one anecdote about let's say a young woman who went to Emory University because her mom had done a postdoc there or something. And so, you know, our school, Syracuse Architecture, is very unique in that we recruit in China, we recruit in high schools there, and we also recruit, you know, among a pretty large network of architects whose interest is in sending, you know, their kids to the U.S. to study architecture. So I always say that our efforts for recruiting and our connection to China is a real retail operation. We literally try to build personal networks and connections. And of course, Aric is right. You know, some of this is economic. A lot of it for us is cultural, because so many students, as recently as 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, their first jobs would either be with a company in the US that had 25 or 30% of its business in China, or they would be finding positions in China. So there was a real economic interest in schools to have connections to China, to have students from China, but also to have domestic students that had connections to those students and to those. So there were industry reasons that students in China became very attractive, I think, to our school and to other schools. And we have retained that so far. I mean, I will tell you, Fei right now is in Shanghai, but he's setting up a variety of new kind of opportunities for us in China, because I'll give an example. We have in our first year class about 39 students in the incoming class who are from China, but who won't be able to arrive in the US in time to start in September because of visa issues. And also just because of travel restrictions. With the 5-1s policy, they probably wouldn't be able to get here in any case. So we're staggering their start. So they start one semester later, but they will finish their first year on time. But in order for them to have a real fall experience, Fei actually is going to be in China and is going to be running a special program for these 39 students to travel to Shenzhen, Beijing, and Shanghai and visit offices, and also to visit architecture, let's say, important architecture sites. This is a kind of retail operation and a kind of a connection that really is not so much about numbers. It's about building relationships, building communities, building connections that are long-term. This will go on for a long time. Fei, I don't know if you want to say something about that, because I want to ask Fei to say something about that, and then I want to ask Nan to say something also related to that, because the necessity of doing this is driven by COVID. It's driven by travel restrictions. It's driven by visa restrictions. And while we are doing some things online, it is very important still to have in-person experiences, in-person studio experiences, and also connections to people in communities. So what Fei is doing is a kind of an analog response to the COVID challenge for us as a school. And I want him to talk about that, but I also want to ask Na after that to talk a little bit about her online architecture courses, because she's really pioneered some of the first online architecture training courses in China. And I think those are a kind of a wave of the future of a certain kind of model of education. And maybe she could say something about that. But Fei, could you first say something about how we're trying to deal with this COVID challenge, this travel challenge, especially with our terrific students in China?
Yeah. So to follow up Michael's comments, probably we are the only one, and we are doing the recruiting in China directly from high school as architecture school from the US. And we've been doing that for 6 years. And we interview students, we visit all their schools, and interview the parents, and also we have alumni, friends, and parents, and students events all together. And not any other school they are doing this. We are doing this for years. And also I personally, I'm friends of so many students and so many parents through WeChat. It's already kind of virtual. I never met them, but I've been guiding their kind of choices and also to help their kids through all the 5 years, even afterwards. And actually, a couple years, 4 years ago, we start our virtual open house, and for our kind of undergrad and grad kind of recruitment, because we have so many international students, they cannot come to visit the campus. So we bring the campus to them. And something really interesting this year, and Alton was part of this. So we have so many kind of virtual open houses, even more than previous years, and we use different kind of platforms. And it was so amazing. And when we were seeing all the students, we were seeing their parents sitting in front of the camera. It never happened that before. So it was.
Or sometimes behind.
Yes.
Sometimes behind, looking over.
Or they're too shy, they are sitting next to it, but they are listening, they are seeing us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid the platform that Na is so has become such an expert in is now failing Professor Wang Fei here. Maybe he will restart in a second. But Na, could you say something about this set of courses that you've started to develop, because it's pretty unique, and I know it's been very successful and exciting to develop these so far. How did this start, and what are they? What are you doing?
Well, first of all, actually, at the beginning, when you sent the questionnaire, there's one question talking about what's the difference between when we were in school or the students right now. I think that's very interesting point. Is when I was in college. That shows age, of course. When I was in the college, most people don't have free access to Wi-Fi, to internet at all, and most people don't have a cell phone. So the only way that we got updated information, know the world news, is from the magazine in the library. So this is dramatically different. How we had all the information, how we communicated with each other. I still remember there was only one line phone that the whole building is shared, and if you make a phone call, you have to go to there to make that phone call. If someone call you, they will yelling in the stereo in every room in the hallways, whose phone come to the first floor together. I think those students now probably they cannot even imagine how to live that kind of a life, how to survive. So that's dramatically changed. But think about this is not very far away. In the past, like 1 to 2 decades, the internet, the Wi-Fi, the mobile phone, the data, all this technology is really developed very, very fast. And this tools actually became so powerful that changed people's behavior, change people's thinking methods. And this is for us, but for the young generation, they've grown up with all this. They naturally thinking with all this technology in their mind. They kind of like people that have two languages as a mother tongue. They come back and forth with this physical world, all this visual world naturally. So they think different already. So that's why in the past few years, when I just came back to China, started to teaching in college. When I get a connection with all the students, I find out, I think this is something have a great potential. The online education going to play a very, very important role in the future education. But I didn't, we had a conversation, Michael, right? We talk about how this online education can scale up, can shift all these resources, and how to affect more people, how to be more free. But the thing is, I didn't see this pandemic actually in one shot. I think the pandemic made this online education rushed into this spotlight. But to be honest, I think the technology currently we're using for online education is still very preliminary. Like Faye just dropped out. The connection, the Wi-Fi, we just single this interface. We use Zoom or other platform, but we can only see each other. We're not sure the other person already hear us or not. All sorts of technology issues. But in the future, I think the technology is going to move or develop dramatically, and it's going to be very, very fast. And there's going to be many things, including visual reality. All technology going to move into this classroom, and we go, especially for architecture education. We need a lot of program. We need a lot of reality. We need to move in, and this already see like a video game or any some other profession. They're already using a lot of the tools. We just needed to figure out how that evolved with online course. But so I see this going to be developed very fast and dramatically, and the online education going to become such powerful tool that eventually will make fundamental change to the education system. I think that can be revolutionary. This is what I see in the future. For example, I think traditionally, if we can say professors, teachers, sometimes in the college, they will teach courses according to this school curriculums and have to follow certain kind of steps. But when this online platform is available, teacher can come to this free public platform to start their own course. They can be free from this whole system. And also the students can select different course and different tutors without constraint of which university or which grade, also things. So they can be more initiative from selection. My experience is in the past few years after I started, besides teaching in university, I started to make experiments on online education. Every time I set up a new course, I always want to try something new. Either the context is new or the teaching methods is new, trying to see how that work, how that reaction is. And the interesting thing is every time when I have this course online, there's students from all over the world actually. especially at this time during the pandemic when I have the new course, a lot of students actually from all over the world, because their school is shut down or they cannot return to the foreign country. So they all over the world students and from all different backgrounds, they're willing to take the challenge. They know the course is going about, so they're willing to take the challenge and they choose to come in, which is very interesting. You see their reaction, you see their more kind of active during this course. They're not very passive because they choose that. They want to do that. They want to take the challenge, which is, I think, very interesting. So from this point, I would say like traditionally the traditional education, the university can be seen as a shell that can have all the students and teachers into this shell, protected with this envelope. But there's also boundary there. But with online education in the future, I think that the university is going to be the core instead of the shell. They're going to be the core and the driving force. And the students and the professor, teachers, they're going to be more active. They're going to be on the front line. And that will make the university more diverse. And I think that's a more globalization, because this, the boundary is going to be very expanded and way eventually eliminated. So I think that this is something that is, online education can bring this huge change in the future. There's one point that we're talking about eventually the early conversation about students going to go to all different countries anyway. I think that's the part of the university. If we look at the university, they not just provide education. I think that there is a very important thing is besides education, there's a degree. University give a degree, and that degree is very important for many people. That's which degree from which university sometimes indicates certain people's social status, and the good university bring this indication. So this is very important for many people that when they choosing schools. And there's another part is very important, the social lives. The social life is to build this bond. This bond is very, very crucial for many students. This bond, think about it as if a traditional university, all the students come to the school, actually they are in very kind of a relatively constrained kind of a physical area, and a group of people going to meet each other in a daily basis for a really long period, for many years. And this kind of activity, this kind of constrained environment make us, the students themselves, between them, have built this kind of a bond. But at the same time, the students going to build bond with the university itself. And this will be mentally extended to all alumni, which is continue in their career. And in the future, when they in their career, they're going to meet the different people with alumni, have a certain mental bond with it. That's very crucial. I think that's one of the core value of university. So online education eventually going to back to this very core value of university in the future.
And it's so powerful that the cup that you're drinking out of right now says Yale on it, right? So you're still in the Yale family.
Yeah, it's Yale family. And I still follow all the Yale news.
You know, online is fantastic, and there are many things you can do with it. But Na was here and gave a workshop for us maybe 2 years ago, and did so many incredible things with our students in person. I'm sure the online courses are fantastic, and I'm sure a lot of people are following them. But I think still to develop that kind of community and to develop that kind of proximity and closeness is, you know, in person is still very important. Maybe Faye, you want to finish out your point if you're back online, just about what we're up to in China now, and then maybe if everybody has wants to make a closing comment. I don't want to keep you all too late into the morning and too late into the night. Are you still there, Faye? I think his quarantine hotel is squeezing him off and not letting him continue. So I don't know. Maybe I'll start with Ying-Yi, since a lot of what I've been talking about tonight, I've really gleaned from your book and from the studies you've done. How do you see education moving forward with Chinese students in the U.S. now? Do you see a break? Do you see a continuation? Yeah. Where are we going?
Well, I don't really see a break. I think even though there would be a break, it's really should be a temporary thing, because the demand is there, and the demand is not really politically driven. What makes things difficult is really politically driven. So I do see these two processes are largely distinct. But I don't really preclude the possibility that things could be very, very difficult in the short term. And going back to, I think Na just raised a very good point in terms of the social life. I think even if without online education, pre-pandemic, the lack of social integration of Chinese international students in America, in the UK, in a lot of, in Australia, in Canada, in most of the traditional Western destination countries is an issue. So in other words, even if they're physically present on campus, doesn't really mean that they're socially integrated. And that's very unfortunate. I think one of my findings is that despite the fact that many Americans think Chinese students are not interested in making American friends, or they're just interested in being in their own group, the reality is very different. A lot of students are very interested in getting more socially integrated with American social fabric on campus, off campus. They just find very, very difficult to do so. There are a lot of cultural barriers, structural barriers, and I lay the blame on American institutions because my empirical studies are conducted in America, so I don't really. So my point on the UK is really secondary. So the scholars in the UK find similar patterns. So in other words, I think the lack of social integration on the part of Chinese students is very real, and American higher education needs to do more. It's really trying to continue attracting them, as well as really fulfilling the internationalization mission that they claim to really trying to embody or advocate. Doesn't really mean that having the presence of Chinese students on campus is necessarily, reaching the goal of internationalization of the institution. Yeah.
Yeah. Alton, Aric, any closing thoughts? It's been a terrific conversation. As I said, I don't want to keep you all morning. I know you have things to do, and I don't want to keep Ying-Yi all night here either. Yeah, do you all have any closing thoughts about this?
Yeah, I would just say, I think again, kind of like what I was just talking about previously is, I just think this is just a very small bump in the road in terms of the rush. I don't think people are changing their plans. I think people are just adjusting to kind of the situation. I think whether it's going to be in November or whether it's going to be 4 years from now, you're going to see a change again. And I just think like right now, everybody is tied to each other so economically that it's just impossible to undo. And I think it's just a growing pains position that's happening. People are just pushing back a little bit or not liking it, but after a while it'll settle and then you'll go forward. Commenting on Ying-Yi's statement regarding kind of Chinese students and adjusting to kind of the Western cultures as they go. you know, being a kid that was an American, you know, ABC, and having a lot, like I grew up in a city called Irvine, where when I was there, I was maybe one of 5 families. And then by the time I graduated college there, it was like 40% Asian. So, you know, I saw that transition. And I would say that, you know, it kind of goes both ways. It's very easy for well-to-do Chinese students to come and have their nice cars and to drive around and to be really flashy and to kind of live in their own bubbles. But it's going to take kind of them to kind of reach outside of their boundaries as well. And I think that education, I mean, the school does need to play a bigger part in terms of kind of acclimating them and providing kind of events and gatherings and things like that so that people can acclimate more. But I think it's also kind of on the individuals to kind of want that. So, you know, I think it'll happen much quicker than I think before, because social media and, you know, things are just, you know, what's trending, what's not trending is becoming more and more globalized. So I think it's a very positive thing. And again, I just don't think it's going to be too much of a backlash. I think it's just a bump in the road.
Can I add one more thing about that?
Yes, please, no, yes.
So we needed to notice is that in US, all these Chinese students or Asian students come to the US university. They are coming to a different environment, in a different culture. Of course, they're going to have a certain barrier, or they needed to adjust themselves into this environment. They take a little distance, how far they want to go, how far they want to reach out. That's depend on individual, but this is a general kind of environment. I also taught a couple of years ago. I also taught international department in Tsinghua University. So all my students is from all over the world. They are now Chinese. The opposite situation here in China. All these international students, they tend to have a reaction within themselves. They don't react that much with Chinese students because, of course, there's a cultural barrier here as well for them. So they need to reach out to certain level as well. So I think that this is obviously is part of their learning process, part of their trying to expand their limits. I think that this is interesting, but also cannot avoid kind of a situation.
You know, one thing I would point out, and this is, I think, one of the really strong arguments that Ying-Yi makes in her book is that the kind of caricature of Chinese students coming to the States, you know, everybody driving GTRs and Porsches is not true. We do have some students who drive GTRs and Porsches, but we also have a lot of students who work, you know, to earn a living. We have students in a wide range of kind of socioeconomic, let's say, situations, and it's not a uniform population. I think it, you know, from school to school and university to university, there's a different approach. I know at our school we have a very strong and large Chinese community in our school, and it's supported, and they're, you know, it's probably 30% of our population. I think, and maybe by virtue of its size, I think all of our students feel very involved in the school, and probably more so involved in the school than they do in the rest of the campus. Ying-Yi and I have been on committees trying to deal with this specific problem across our campus, that non-integration, and the university is not providing enough opportunity for students to integrate and to solicit them to do so. I think it's only fitting that we end with Mr. Sunshine himself, Aric Chen, who has offered. I feel so much better after this conversation about the future. I came in tonight with a very bleak view of what could happen tomorrow, and now I'm going to be very happy to go to sleep and wake up tomorrow, because I think things can happen again. Aric, you wanna expand on that, or do you wanna?
Oh no, Michael.
Final comments. Any final comments?
Well, now I have nothing to say because
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, well, look, I mean, like, you know, we try to be optimistic because we sort of have to be, and I think generally, you know, the sun does tend to rise again tomorrow, right? I mean, that being said, you know, like in some ways, I'm actually less optimistic maybe than what I've gathered from some of the other speakers. You know, you know, especially when it comes to the sort of U.S.-China relationship, right? Like, I mean, hopefully with Biden, hopefully Biden will be in the White House, and there will be, and he can restore some sanity to at least the executive branch. But of course, it's not that simple, and sadly, it seems seeing China as a threat has, I think, quite literally become the only issue in the U.S. Congress with bipartisan support. So this, and we all certainly know the situation here in China as well. So this sort of these tensions run very, very deep, and they're not going to go away with the change of a U.S. president. That being said, there are, I think maybe one thing we can learn from this discussion today is that there are many ways of navigating complicated situations. So, you know, as certain doors close, others will open, and I think those of us in you know, architecture, culture, education certainly have the abilities and responsibility. And responsibilities to find ways to navigate this, not just for us, but for our students and everyone else.
Aric, I just want to add one point. Don't get me wrong. I'm not optimistic at all about U.S.-China relations during Biden administration. I am only optimistic under Biden. I am hopeful that the administration will not really use Chinese students as a political ploy. That's the only thing that I am hopeful about. I agree with you. I think U.S.-China tensions will not go away anytime soon. It's a bipartisan, one of the rare shared theme that it's a bipartisan consensus. But again, I think Chinese students and educational collaborations should not really be as a political spotlight as it is now. I think that's really the Trump signature, and that's something that I think it could go away if we change a president. Yeah.
Sure.
I want to add. Sorry, I know it's final comments, but
no, go right ahead.
Okay, I would say this coming from a guy who works for a multinational corporation. I'm on the boards of a lot of different things like the U.S.-China Business Council. Talk a lot with a lot of, I'm also part of this organization called YPO, which is Young Presidents Organization, which is all about kind of, you know, economic, company, corporate, multinational corporations operating globally. There is, you know, money must be made, right? I mean, companies which drive a lot of the U.S. policies are often driven by, you know, economic interests. And, you know, there is such a strong tie between what's happening with China and the U.S. economically that it's really difficult to pull it apart. I would say that, you know, you're right. The United States used to be the big dog on the planet, and they used to control everything. And now China is coming around, and the U.S. doesn't like it. You know, it's just like if you look at any situation, right? There's a threat that's happening. But I think that there will be bumps in the road, and I think things will, you know, inevitably maybe even get worse before it gets better. But I think that commerce must continue. And I think that, you know, for example, like what, you know, Syracuse University is doing with the aggressive recruitment and going into China, and, you know, other schools are going to follow. And I think that as we start to look at, you know, various different people crossing boundaries and building their lives in different countries, like, and I've built my life in Asia. I grew up in the United States. And then if you look at, for example, the amount of revenue that my company makes in Asia Pacific region versus what it makes in the US, that number is rapidly growing. So, you know, I would say that although politically there might be a lot of challenges that we face, I would say economically, that's going to be a very good counterweight to all of that. So that's where my optimism comes from. It's just the need to prosper.
Wow, we're yo-yoing up and down, up and down. I love this. This has been a. Faye, do you have any closing comments? We lost you for a bit. We're winding down. Yeah.
I heard every single word you were saying, but I cannot.
Oh my.
Yeah. Yes. So that's really kind of weird stuff. Right now, I'm connecting with my cell phone's signal, not the hotel Wi-Fi. So yeah, I totally agree with everyone's comments. It's just everyone will take a very different point of view based on what's happening right now. But for us as educator, we are doing things really just for bigger. Several other schools, they just announced that we're gonna do everything online. That's it. But we are tailoring things for different needs, specifically not just for one kind of solution. So we have first year, we have this, I'm gonna teach all the kids to do all kinds of amazing stuff, but all other year students, they were so jealous. I want to take the course, but this is specifically why it's happening. We are doing things kind of re-adaptable to some of the situation. And also we will invite 2 kind of visiting professors to teach our fourth year studio because we have 26 students in China, one in Shanghai, one in Beijing. So we'll teach their course and then design course there. And also that'll be kind of a different kind of conditions. Some of the students, they cannot travel directly, I mean, the whole 3 months in one city. So they will do partial kind of online, partial in person. So we this kind of system really kind of flexible, then depends on what kind of condition, then everyone will take advantage of what's happening right now. So this is, as educator, we have to be able to provide something really remarkable, not just only one solution. And also just the final comments is like, because of pandemic, so we were able to hear Alton singing again. So that was really amazing stuff on Instagram. So that was great. So to bring us again.
Yeah, you all should follow Alton's Instagram. You know, he was a super famous singer. He put himself through architecture school, singing pop songs. Yeah, so maybe so you all have to go to his Instagram. You'll get a treat. You'll be surprised. He's very good. He's very good. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I learned an enormous amount. It's great to see everybody. Some of you I haven't seen in a while. I hope to see everybody sometime soon. And yeah, thank you again. And
thank you, Michael.
That's it. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you,
Good
Michael.
evening.
Thank you for everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye.